how-tos. You're in the middle of a two-part series about study skills. Last week we talked about some general overall considerations for how to study better, including locations and how to schedule your time, etc. Well, today we'll do a few more of those broad concepts and then we'll get down to specifics. Okay, find optimal study locations. And this is really important for you moms who are homeschooling children, large numbers of children. You may find that they do better off in bedrooms or down hallways or on another floor of the house to get away from multiple distractions, and that they can produce twice as much that way. So seek out quiet, private places. I've even taught children in vans and in cars and down by riverbeds and all kinds of creative places where studying can take place. In libraries, often obscure corners, they're often really quiet spots, and you know where the quiet spots are in your home. And then evaluate each week at the end of it. How could your students have saved even more time next week? How could they have tightened their work ethic and eliminated more distractions? And then when they're listening to something, let's say on a YouTube or with a lecture that's given online, teach them how to take notes, to just jot down the key words, the most important points, and how to do that rapidly. Then teach your children about the value of spaced repetition. You know, when a student studies, let's say, a piano passage or some instrumental musical passage, when they practice from point A to point B, the next time they practice, they do not pick up at point B and go to point C. The next time they practice, they'll go somewhere between points A and B. In other words, practice overlaps because you have to pick up some review from the time before. So spaced repetition helps them overlap and overlay that imprinting in the autonomic nervous system. So it's much better to do short sections that are spaced and repeated. Okay, and then diet is another large consideration that helps smart study skills. Caffeine and sugar cause major drops in glucose in the brain. Drinking plenty of water each day, half your body weight in ounces, is crucial for having a good lubricated system that lubricates the brain as well. Meat can make the brain sluggish because it takes extraordinary energy to digest it. So if you really are going to go in and take a test or whatever, you might want carbs instead of something heavy, some heavy protein. And it's better to take an exam on a light lunch, light stomach. And non-sugary treats would be the way to go for extending study periods. Okay, so all those were general large considerations that aid in studying. Now we're going to look specifically at attacking a passage in a book. First, read a section and then close the book. Then immediately write down or speak a summary of what you've just read in as much detail as possible. For best results, don't eat or talk on the phone or go somewhere, thus causing any time to elapse between the reading process and the summarizing process. The more immediately you summarize after reading, the stronger your long-term retention will be. Number 2, this is still about learning from a passage in a book, a textbook, for example, or a biography. To fix your remembrance of certain material, summarize it again a few days later. Consistent recall of these details is far more effective than cramming for exams the night before. Okay, now how to attack and conquer a textbook chapter. First of all, read all of the questions at the end of the chapter first, so that when you read with purpose to find those specific answers. Number 2, get an overview of the entire chapter before you read the text of that chapter. In other words, read the table of contents and then read all the large print section titles, the captions to pictures, graphs, and maps, etc. Get a real flush and overview of what that material is going to be about. Number 3, get a second overview. Read only the first sentence of every paragraph in that chapter. Number 4, now read the entire section rapidly with no interruptions. Read faster than you comfortably can. Small words are insignificant. You learn to just romp past them. You don't need to take the time to say them in your brain. Skip to the key words. Increased speed of reading means increased comprehension. Use your hand or a 3x5 card as a marker to keep you moving swiftly down the page. The principle here is that multiple rapid readings are better than one slow reading. And number 5, again, recall as many details from memory as you can immediately after you've finished reading the chapter. All right, now here's some tips for taking standardized exams. SATs, ACTs, corporation tests, certification tests. Number 1, as you did with your textbook chapters, do now for each sort selection on all your tests. Read all the questions for each section first before reading the selection, so that you can then read for meaning and successfully answer the questions the first time through. Number 2, answer all the easy questions rapidly first. Number 3, locate keywords in each short selection of the text to help you focus on main ideas. And number 4, to correct answers on a multiple choice question usually means two correct answers on a multiple choice question usually means the answer is all of the above. And one more thing about test taking, go with your first instinct. They've found statistically that if you think it's this answer, but then later you rethink it and change the answer, often that second answer is not the accurate one. Your first hunch about it was better. Okay, now finally, let's look at a few verses of scripture to further fortify the importance of good study habits. Here's one in Ecclesiastes 10:10 about working smarter, not harder. If the axe is dull and its owner does not sharpen its edge, he must exert more strength. In other words, wisdom has the advantage of giving success. Work smarter, not harder. The second verse, diligent hands will rule, but laziness ends in slave labor. That's Proverbs 12:24. Proverbs 22:29 says, a man skilled in his work will stand before kings, and skill requires repetitive attacks of that skill area. Lots and lots and lots of experience with that area. Okay, another one. Daniel was well informed and quick to understand. Daniel 1:4 says he had to have studied to become well informed. Okay, he didn't just know all that stuff off the top of his head. He had to have studied it. He had to have been a student of mental discipline. And the next scripture, the last one, is Joshua 1:8. Meditate on the word day and night, and then you shall have good success. That's an excellent study skill. It gets your spirit in the right place to receive wisdom about the things that you're studying, and to receive little tips about how to do it faster. And so we see that good, strong study habits will eventually lead to advantage. Okay, that closes our section on study habits, work smarter, not harder. And I want to end this session today with some comments about penmanship. You know, regardless of how students start or what system of penmanship they learn, eventually most students' penmanship collapses somewhere in adolescence and begins to become sloppier and sloppier. Well, this was particularly so in a ghetto situation where the penmanship was so bad the teachers in the school just couldn't even read the papers. And so they invited in some experts to do some analysis and try to improve the children's handwriting. And so those experts looked at lots and lots of stacks of papers, and they identified the problem letters, the letters that collapse, the letters that create confusion when you're reading that word. And they figured out how to fix those recurring specific problems. And they gave one lesson in the ghetto to these same students, and they showed before and after overhead pictures via an overhead projector, and it was incredible the difference after one session in these children's penmanship. So I'm going to give you their little pointers that made such a big difference. And what you do is you have your student just write down these rules that I'm going to tell you. They write down these rules for penmanship, and as they're writing, they apply the principle. Okay, and they're very simple. I'm going to read them to you. And if you want to get the little article about it, just go to our website, and it only costs $1, and it's called Surefire Penmanship. And these lists are all written out for you in this gorgeous handwriting that is clearly read. It is not fancy. It is simple and straightforward, so that they can see a sample of it. But for those of you listening over the radio, you can get a good hunch about it by hearing the principles. Okay, number one, these experts took all the slant out of the handwriting. And if you think about it, there's nothing in the 10 Commandments that says we must do penmanship on a slant. So they took it out, and they caused the students to write straight up and down. So the first rule was write straight up and down. Number 2, write tall and skinny. Number 3, make the K, L, F, G, and H tall and thin. In other words, they're going to hit the line on the top, and they're going to stretch to the line beneath, and they're going to be thin letters. Okay, number 4, make the G, Y, and Z cross on the line. In other words, some kids make that tail real curly Q-y, and they'll cross back over that straight line with their curly Q somewhere in the middle of the line or below the line. No, if they cross right on the line, it neatens it up immensely with the tail of those letters, the G, Y, and the Z. Number 5, make the R like a tree stump, just slightly slanted on the top of the stump. Number 6, take the loop out of the D, D as in dog, and P as in papa. Take the loop totally out of those, the tall stick for the D and the dropping stick for the P. Just take the loop out and trace that stick right back down on its same shaft. Number 7, trace the T up and down. Do not make it like a tent where when you come down the T, you're spreading it apart. No, trace exactly down that shaft of the first stick you made. Tightly trace it down, and then swing it out to the right at the bottom. So trace the T up and down. Do not make it look like a tent. Okay, number 8, take the loop in the O out so that it doesn't look like a smiley face or hair drooping down over the circle of a face. Just take the loop out of the O entirely, close the O at the top, and go straight across. No loop whatsoever. Number 9, dot the I. Don't put a circle over the I. The children get quite flamboyant with just putting circles and whoop-de-doos on I's and O's. Number 10, do not close the B. So when they're making B as in baby, they go straight up with a tall, skinny line, come down, and do not close the bottom right loop back up. Leave a little mouth open there, and they go straight out to the right. Number 11, never swing the tails of G or F. Okay, those need to go straight up and down, ramrod straight. Number 12, close the S without a loop. Lots of children make their S, and then when they're coming back to hit the initial stick, they'll do a loop-de-loop there. And that makes the paper messy. Number 13, do not point the top of the H hump. So you take the long stick and make it tall and skinny, and then when you're making the little hump for the H, do not make a point out of it. Make sure it's good and round. Okay, so those were the overall rules for penmanship, and now we're going to give you the rules for writing the small letters. Number 1, A, C, and E, all small letters, must be the same height. Okay, if they're all uniform, the same height, just half the space of the writing space, then they will look nice and neat and regimented, not some larger than others. Number 2, the B, as in baby, we talked about this again, needs to be a thin loop up and open the bottom. Number 3, D, no loop in the D at all. Just trace that line down. Number 4, F, again, should be thin loops up to the top and thin loops down to the line below. Number 5, a thin loop for the Q and the G. What the children generally do is swing the G's, and we don't want swinging G's. Cross on the line. Otherwise, two joined letters would look very loosely unrecognizable. Number 6, we already talked about, don't put a hump on the H. Number I, no circle over the I. J needs a long, thin loop. K needs to be tall and skinny again. The L, a thin, tall letter. M, round the M's. Do not point the humps on the M's. Same thing for the N's. N as in nose or Nancy. Make that rounded. Number 13, no loop in the top of the O, as we talked about for the capital. And number 14, no loop in the P, as we talked about for the capital. 15, Q is a thin loop. R is the tree stump, slightly slanted. S, no loop at all. T, no loop, not like a tent. And then the U, V, W, X all need to be the same height. The Y needs to be a thin loop, no swinging tail. And the Z needs to be a thin loop. Do not make a swinging tail. So just even one of those suggestions will revolutionize what your children's penmanship looks like. If they just copy a paragraph out of the Bible, for example, and just have them practice writing straight up and down, ramrod straight, and making their letters tall and skinny, it will make a marvelous difference in the overall impression of the page. So there you have it. With these study skills and with improved penmanship, it should be these tips should be a real contribution to their academic progress. Okay, and another thing you want to have your students do is take daily dictations. No matter how much grammar they're studying or writing they're studying, if they write what you dictate to them, you will immediately see what is still not in the brain, what is still not routine, not dependable, just not there yet for the student. Even if they get A's on examples in books, when they actually have to write themselves, it can be a whole different story. Dictation was used largely in French schools several decades ago with remarkable success. So what you do is you just dictate 5 sentences a day and make sure they have some sort of complication in them. Like you might say, the plumber said your pipes are broken. So you would teach them that what actually comes out of the plumber's mouth is your pipes are broken. So you make a mouth around those words, and then you make the double lip lines. Then you erase all that mouth except for the little quotation, the little ends of the mouth, and those become the quotation mark. So that clearly shows them how to identify what needs to be in quotes, what actually comes out of the mouth. So you can conquer little things like that, and lots of spelling rules and issues. I'm going to give you now some spelling mnemonics so that these are more tips for study skills. All right, if you're using the words all right, there are 2 words. It's either all right or all wrong. That's how you remember what that one means when you need to use 2 words instead of using 1 word for all right. The word beauty has the words B-A. So B-A, beauty. That'll help them remember to put that A in there. Believe, the word believe. Don't believe a lie. It has the word lie in it, L-I-E. Busyness, you just think of the word busy, and then ness for business. Okay, and all you do is just change the Y to I. Busyness. If you're running a business, you're busyness. February, you say brr in February. Friend, you'll be my friend to the end. Has the little word end in it. Hear, you hear with your ear. It has the little word ear in it. Independent, there is a dent in independent. Piece, have a piece of pie, the kind that means a section of something. Pleasant, picnics are pleasant for an ant. Many wonder if it's E-N-T or A-N-T, so you just say picnics are pleasant for an ant to remember that it's A-N-T. Prairie, there is air on the prairie. Principal, A rule can be called a principle. Now think of the spelling of rule, R-U-L-E, and then principle has L-E in it if it means a guiding thought instead of a person. If it's the principal of a school, he's your pal, principal, P-A-L. Prison, her son is in prison, son. Secretary, a secretary can keep a secret. That's what it begins with. Separate, there is a rat in separate. That helps them know what the end of that word is all about. Stationary, use stationary to write a letter. Letter ends in ER, and so you use ER in stationary instead of AR. Together, you just separate it into 3 little words, to get her. Tomorrow, you just think Tom or row. And weather, we eat in all kinds of weather, so it has a little word eat in it. Okay, so those were some spelling tips, some little spelling mnemonics. All right, and finally, we'd want to talk about the parts of speech of a sentence, how to identify them quickly. Well, what I use for this are shapes. And again, if you want to read extensively about this, you just get our little booklet, Shape Up Sentences or Teach Grammar Faster. It's out in both names. Okay, the first thing you tell a child to do is go through a sentence and find all the names of persons, places, or things, and those are nouns. And they put a rectangle around those words. And then the second thing you have them do is determine what the action is in the sentence, and they will put a triangle around the action, and that, of course, is a verb. Then they ask the question, who or what did the verb? Who or what did that action? And that will be their subject, and it will always be a rectangle, a word they have already located. And then for the subject, you'll put a big X in it. Okay, then for an adjective, I use the little memory hook, add a juicy detail, adjective, add a juicy detail to your nouns, and those will all be circled. And then finally, for adverbs, I say add something to a verb. So it's called add verbs, add to the verb. Okay, so let's do an example of it quickly. The dirty floor was soon spotlessly clean. In that sentence, if you write it down, you'll find that the nouns are floor and clean. Those should both have a rectangle around them. Then you ask the child, what is the verb? And in this case, it is was, and you put a triangle. And I always teach the children, if they cannot find an action word, then they have to find a sitting verb or a being verb. In other words, something that's just is. It's not going anywhere, it's not doing anything, it's just sitting, it's being. And so that list I teach them real quickly is am, be, being, been, was, were, is, are, and then have, had, and has. Okay, so they would hunt for those for their verbs that get a triangle around them. Adjectives are all circled. They're the words that describe a noun, and adverbs are put in a stop sign. And the way they make the stop sign is to make the 4 sides, but don't put the corners in, and then just put the corners in as slants. So they just put little pieces of all 4 sides and then slant the corners, and there they have a stop sign. So that should help them immediately learn how to diagram a sentence and understand a sentence's parts. So we hope these little tips have really aided you in how you're going to approach teaching